No one defended the broken Omega at the trial as the Alpha King rose to shield her. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main characters. Olivia Clarke had always been seen as nothing more than a fragile piece in a world built on power and dominance. As an Omega, she was often overlooked, disregarded, and treated as less than human by the society around her. Her role in this rigid hierarchy was clear, weak, vulnerable, and in desperate need of protection. But that day, in the grand hall of the royal court, things were about to change for her, though she didn't know it yet. The trial was intense, the air thick with judgment. Olivia sat in the center, trembling, feeling the weight of 1,000 eyes on her. The trial was about a crime she didn't commit, but in a world where Omega's word held little weight, her innocence meant nothing. No one stood by her. No one spoke for her. She was alone. The courtroom murmured, voices rising in a harsh chorus, accusing her, condemning her. She sat there, her heart pounding, wishing someone would stand up for her, but she had no such hope. That's when he walked in. Ethan Hunter, the Alpha King, the most powerful man in the kingdom. His presence was commanding, his every step radiating strength and authority. The moment his eyes met Olivia's, the chaos in the room seemed to quiet, like a storm suddenly stilled. Ethan had heard the whispers, seen the reports, and he knew what was happening. He knew that Olivia, despite being just an Omega, was being unfairly dragged through the mud. His chest tightened with a fierce protectiveness he hadn't expected. As the murmurs of the crowd grew louder, Ethan stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "Enough," he said, his tone icy but filled with command. The room fell silent. All eyes were on him. And in that silence, the Alpha King did the unthinkable. He rose to defend the broken Omega who had no one to stand by her. He wasn't supposed to care. She wasn't supposed to matter to him. But in that moment, none of that seemed to matter. His eyes never left Olivia as he made his stand, his words powerful, unwavering. "She is innocent," he declared, the certainty in his voice shocking everyone in the room. The battle for Olivia had only just begun, and Ethan was ready to face whatever it took to protect her. The room remained eerily quiet after Ethan's declaration, as if time itself had paused. Olivia's heart raced in her chest, not from fear, but from something far more complicated. She had spent so long fighting for a shred of dignity in a world that treated her as lesser, but now, in this moment, someone powerful, was standing up for her. Ethan Hunter, the Alpha King, who could crush any opposition with a mere thought, was speaking for her innocence. For a brief moment, Olivia dared to hope, but the silence in the room was quickly broken by voices of disbelief and protest. The members of the court, most of whom had been raised on the principles of power and control, could not fathom why their king would defend an Omega, someone deemed insignificant by their laws. "This is preposterous," a voice from the back of the room shouted. "She's an Omega, my lord. She has no place here." Another voice, lower but equally filled with disdain, joined in. "The law is the law. You cannot protect someone who is beneath you." But Ethan's gaze never wavered from Olivia. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, were now filled with something else, something fierce, something protective. He didn't care what the court said, or what the laws of this society dictated. He had made his decision. Olivia was not going to suffer for the injustice done to her. "She will be protected," Ethan said, his voice unwavering. "You will show respect to her, as you would to anyone else in this room." The words hung in the air, heavy with authority. It was clear that Ethan's presence was commanding enough to force the room into a tense, uneasy stillness. For a moment, it seemed as if the whole court held its breath, wondering what Ethan would do next. Olivia, however, could not tear her eyes away from him. She had never known anyone who could challenge the system so boldly, someone who could make the world seem a little less harsh. But she was also aware of the risks he was taking. As the Alpha King, his power was absolute, but it also made him a target. His enemies would not forgive this act of defiance. especially when it came to an Omega like her. Ethan, however, seemed unbothered by their discontent. He stepped forward, moving with the confidence of a man who knew that his words would carry weight, whether the court liked it or not. "The trial is over," he declared. "I will take full responsibility for Olivia Clarke's actions. You may present your case against her, but I will ensure that no harm comes to her." There was an audible gasp in the room as the court members exchanged uneasy glances. No one had ever dared to defy the laws like this. And yet, Ethan Hunter, the Alpha King, was doing just that. As he turned to Olivia, his expression softened slightly, as if reminding her that she was not alone. "You're safe now," he said quietly, though his voice carried the strength of his resolve. Olivia wanted to speak, to thank him, but the words caught in her throat. She was overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events, by the sheer impossibility of it all. Ethan had just single-handedly altered the course of her life. She had always known that there were people who would look down on her for being an Omega, but she never imagined that someone of his stature would stand beside her, let alone fight for her. As the room buzzed with murmurs and the trial continued, Olivia realized that this was just the beginning. Ethan's protection would change everything, but it also meant that the world was about to take a much closer look at her. The stakes had been raised, and she couldn't go back to the way things were before. But for the first time in her life, Olivia allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. Ethan Hunter had chosen her, and that meant everything. The days that followed the trial were filled with uncertainty and whispers. Olivia Clarke had never imagined that her life would change so drastically in a matter of hours. The news of the Alpha King's defense of an Omega, especially one like her, spread quickly throughout the kingdom. She could feel the weight of the gossip following her wherever she went. It was a strange mix of awe, curiosity, and outright disbelief. Some people were in shock, others in admiration, and there were those who couldn't understand why Ethan Hunter had chosen to protect her. Olivia found herself in a new reality, one that she hadn't been prepared for. She was no longer the quiet, unnoticed Omega she had once been. Now, people looked at her differently, their eyes filled with a combination of intrigue and caution. She could feel their gazes wherever she went, and it was both unsettling and empowering. Ethan's protection had given her something she never thought she would have: visibility. And with that visibility came responsibility, both to herself and to the world around her. But no matter how much the world changed, there was one thing that remained the same: the overwhelming sense of uncertainty that still clung to Olivia's every step. Despite Ethan's promise to protect her, she could not help but wonder what his motives were. Why had he chosen her? Was it truly out of a sense of justice, or was there something more? Ethan had said she was safe, but Olivia knew that in a world like theirs, safety was fleeting. The political landscape was shifting, and as the Alpha King's actions had shown, not everyone was going to be happy with his decisions. Olivia's every move was now scrutinized, and that made her feel more exposed than ever. She had no choice but to trust in Ethan, though doubt lingered in the corners of her mind. She found herself spending more time in the royal palace, an unfamiliar environment that was both awe-inspiring and intimidating. The vast halls, the intricate tapestries, and the bustling courtyards made her feel like a stranger in a foreign land. It was a world of power and influence, where every glance could mean something and every word carried weight. Yet, despite the grandiosity of it all, Olivia felt strangely alone. The only person she could truly trust was Ethan. He had been her protector in the courtroom, and now, he was her only ally in this new, uncertain world. As the days passed, Ethan made it clear that he was not backing down from his decision to shield Olivia. He spent more time with her, offering guidance and support as she navigated the challenges that came with her newfound status. His presence was reassuring, but also, there was a tension in the air. Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more between them than just protection. Ethan was not the type of man to act without reason, and his growing attention toward her seemed to speak volumes. At times, his gaze would linger on her a little longer than necessary, and when they spoke, there was a quiet intensity in his voice that made Olivia's heart race. But no matter how much she tried to convince herself that her emotions were simply the result of his kindness and protection, Olivia couldn't ignore the growing connection between them. She couldn't deny that the presence of the Alpha King stirred something deep inside her, something that both frightened and excited her. But she was determined not to let it distract her from the larger picture. She had a life to rebuild, a reputation to salvage, and she couldn't afford to be distracted by feelings that were beyond her control. As Olivia continued to adjust to her new life, one thing became painfully clear. The road ahead would be anything but easy. The kingdom was filled with people who would do anything to maintain the status quo, and Olivia was now part of a game that she had never wanted to play. But Ethan had made his choice, and for better or worse, she was now tied to him. She only hoped that when the time came, her trust in him would prove to be the right decision. The days grew longer for Olivia as she adjusted to her new life under the protection of Ethan Hunter, the Alpha King. While the palace offered her safety, it also reminded her of the complexities of the world she had entered. She had been thrust into a position that she wasn't prepared for, no longer just a quiet Omega, but a woman under the watchful eyes of the kingdom. The whispers continued to follow her wherever she went. People still couldn't understand why the Alpha King had chosen to protect her, an Omega who was deemed insignificant by so many. Some saw it as an act of kindness, while others saw it as a political move, a way to maintain power by controlling the fate of an innocent woman. Olivia, however, didn't care for their opinions. She had her own worries, her future, her place in the world, and the growing tension she felt when around Ethan. The king was not like the others. He was different. He wasn't like the other alphas, who took what they wanted without care. Ethan was commanding, strong, but also careful and, at times, gentle. He had a way of making her feel safe, yet there was something about his presence that made her heart race. She couldn't pinpoint it, but the more time she spent with him, the more she felt something stirring inside her. A connection that she wasn't sure was wise to acknowledge. One afternoon, as Olivia walked through the royal gardens, lost in thought, Ethan appeared beside her. His sudden presence startled her, but she quickly masked her surprise. He had been more distant recently, caught up in the matters of the kingdom, leaving her with a strange sense of longing. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, his deep voice softer than usual. Olivia smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "No, not at all," she replied, trying to keep her tone light. "I was just thinking." "About what?" Ethan asked, his gaze fixed on her. She hesitated. The truth was, she had been thinking about everything. About him, about her place in this new world, about the inevitable struggles that lay ahead. But she couldn't say that to him. Not now. "About what's next," she said quietly, looking down at the path ahead. "I never asked for any of this. I don't know what to expect." Ethan's expression softened. He stepped closer, his presence a comforting force. "You don't have to face it alone," he said gently. Olivia looked up at him, her heart fluttering at the sincerity in his eyes. "But you don't know what it means to be in my shoes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Being an Omega, it's not something people respect. Even with you standing beside me, I can feel the weight of the world on me." Ethan's jaw tightened as he looked at her, his eyes filled with determination. "It doesn't matter what the world thinks of you," he said firmly. "I've chosen to stand by you, Olivia, and I will continue to do so, no matter what anyone else says." His words hit her harder than she expected. There was a sincerity in them, a promise that she hadn't realized she needed to hear. But as much as she wanted to believe him, there was still a part of her that couldn't shake the feeling of fear, the fear that, no matter how much Ethan cared, the world around her would never accept her. Still, for the first time in a long while, Olivia allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something better. She couldn't predict what the future would hold, but for now, in this moment, she had Ethan's protection. And that, at least, was something worth holding on to. As the days passed, Olivia began to settle into the rhythm of life at the royal palace. There were moments of peace, but there were also moments where the weight of her new reality pressed heavily on her chest. Ethan's presence was a comfort, yet it also reminded her of the delicate balance she had to maintain. She had been thrust into a world of politics, power, and influence, and despite Ethan's promises, she couldn't escape the feeling that she was merely a pawn in a much larger game. The court was still a place of tension. Many of the nobles and officials were still unsure about Ethan's decision to protect her. Some saw her as a symbol of rebellion, others as a sign of weakness, and there were even whispers that Ethan's act of kindness could come back to haunt him. Olivia often found herself caught in the middle of conversations she couldn't fully understand, surrounded by people who seemed more concerned with their own agendas than with her well-being. But there were small moments when she could let go of the stress and just breathe. One evening, after a particularly long day of court meetings, Ethan invited Olivia to join him for a walk through the palace grounds. The air was crisp, and the stars were bright above them as they strolled side by side in silence. It was one of those rare moments when she felt free from the eyes that constantly watched her, free from the weight of expectations. "You seem quieter than usual tonight," Ethan remarked, glancing at her from the corner of his eye. Olivia smiled faintly. "I suppose I'm just trying to get used to all of this." She motioned to the vast gardens, the marble fountains, and the distant towers that made up the palace. "It's so different from what I'm used to." "I can only imagine," Ethan replied. "But you're adjusting well. It's not easy, but I see you handling it." She wasn't sure if he was saying it just to make her feel better, but his words were kind, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe them. They continued walking, the only sound being the rustling of leaves in the gentle breeze. Olivia found herself enjoying the calm, the absence of all the noise and pressure that filled the palace walls. For a moment, it felt like the world outside didn't matter. "Ethan," she said after a long pause, her voice soft. "Why are you doing this?" "Protecting me, I mean." Ethan stopped walking, turning to face her. The look in his eyes was more intense than she had ever seen, and it took her by surprise. "Because I promised," he said quietly, taking a step closer. "I promised you that I would stand by you. And I don't break my promises." There was an undeniable sincerity in his voice, a weight to the words that made Olivia's heart beat faster. She hadn't realized just how much she needed to hear them. His commitment, his loyalty, was something she hadn't expected, and yet it meant more to her than she could express. "But why me?" she asked again, this time with more urgency. "You don't owe me anything." Ethan seemed to hesitate for a moment before he spoke again, his gaze softening. "Maybe I don't owe you anything, but I see something in you, Olivia. Something I can't ignore. You're strong, even when you don't realize it. And that's something worth fighting for." His words lingered in the air between them, and for a moment, the distance that had always existed between them felt a little smaller. Olivia wasn't sure how to respond. She had never thought of herself as strong, especially not in a world that constantly told her she was weak. But in that moment, standing there with Ethan, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she was starting to believe it. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ethan smiled, his eyes warm. "You don't have to thank me. Just trust me." Olivia nodded, her heart filled with a mix of emotions. The road ahead was uncertain, and she knew the challenges were far from over. But for the first time since her life had been turned upside down, she felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she had thought. The next few weeks in the palace were a whirlwind of change for Olivia. Every day brought new challenges, new faces, and a constant undercurrent of tension that she could never quite shake. Despite Ethan's promises, she couldn't escape the feeling that she was still the subject of scrutiny, both from the court and from the kingdom at large. The nobles, the advisors, the generals, they all seemed to watch her, measuring her worth, trying to determine what role she would play in this new chapter of the kingdom's story. Olivia spent more time in the royal gardens, walking alone and trying to find moments of solitude, where she could think without the weight of the world pressing down on her. It was there, one afternoon, that Ethan found her again. He had been busy with meetings all day, his usual confident demeanor now overshadowed by the weight of his responsibilities. Still, when he saw Olivia, a sense of relief washed over him. She had become a constant presence in his life, someone he could count on, even if she didn't realize it yet. "Olivia," he said, his voice softer than usual, as he approached her by the fountain. She looked up, startled for a moment, but quickly smiled. "I didn't expect to see you today," she said, her voice gentle, though tinged with the exhaustion she was trying to hide. Ethan smiled back, but there was something different in his eyes, something that made Olivia's heart race. "I wanted to check on you," he said simply. Olivia raised an eyebrow, surprised by his words. "You're busy enough with your duties, Ethan. I'm sure you have more important things to do." Ethan shook his head, his expression serious. "There is nothing more important to me right now than making sure you're okay." Olivia's heart fluttered at his words, though she tried to push the feeling aside. It was dangerous to get attached, to let her emotions take control. She couldn't afford to let herself become vulnerable, not when everything was still so uncertain. "I'm fine," she said, her voice steady. "I'm just getting used to everything." Ethan stepped closer, his gaze never leaving her face. "I don't want you to feel alone in all of this," he said quietly. "I know it's not easy, but I'm here, Olivia, and I won't let you go through this alone." His words hit her harder than she expected, and for a moment, Olivia was at a loss for what to say. She wanted to believe him, to let herself lean into his comfort, but there was still a part of her that couldn't fully trust him. She had been let down by so many before. But Ethan's sincerity was undeniable, and it stirred something deep inside her, a feeling of warmth, of hope, that she hadn't allowed herself to experience in a long time. "I know you're trying to protect me," Olivia said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's not just about that, is it? There's something more." Ethan's gaze softened as he regarded her. He knew exactly what she meant. There was something more, something that had been building between them since the day he decided to stand up for her. It wasn't just about protecting her anymore. It was about the bond they were forming, one that neither of them had expected but could no longer ignore. "You're right," he said, his voice low and steady. "It's not just about protection, Olivia. I can't deny that there's something between us. But I want you to know that whatever happens, whatever comes next, I'm not going anywhere. I won't leave you to face this alone." His words were like a promise, a vow that he intended to keep no matter the cost. Olivia felt her heart swell at his words, but she quickly pushed the feeling aside. She couldn't afford to become too attached, not when the future was so uncertain, and not when the world around them was so unpredictable. But even as she tried to guard her emotions, Olivia couldn't help but feel that, for the first time in her life, she had found someone who truly cared. Someone who would stand by her no matter what. And that, in itself, was something worth believing in. The days continued to pass, and with each passing moment, Olivia found herself growing more accustomed to the delicate dance of palace life. It was a strange mix of luxury and confinement. Luxury in the form of beautiful chambers, exquisite meals, and the finest clothes she had ever worn, but confinement in the sense that she was always under watchful eyes. Every move she made, every word she spoke, was carefully observed. And yet, despite this overwhelming sense of being trapped in a gilded cage, Olivia couldn't ignore the fact that she had started to feel something for Ethan. The connection between them had grown stronger with each passing day, and though she tried to guard her emotions, the warmth that bloomed in her chest whenever he was near was undeniable. Ethan, on his part, remained as steadfast as ever. His protectiveness was unwavering, but it was more than just the promise he had made to her. There was something deeper now, something that neither of them could ignore. It wasn't just about duty anymore. It was about a bond that was growing between them. And Olivia, though uncertain and afraid of what that might mean, couldn't help but feel drawn to him in a way that she had never felt before. It was a dangerous feeling, one that could lead to heartbreak, but she couldn't deny the pull. One evening, after dinner, Olivia found herself alone in the palace garden once again, trying to gather her thoughts. She had been growing more restless lately, unable to fully settle into the life that had been thrust upon her. The future was uncertain, and the shadows of what might come always loomed over her. Ethan appeared as though he had been searching for her. He moved with purpose, his tall frame cutting through the evening air as he approached her. "I was hoping I would find you here," he said softly, his voice low and comforting. Olivia turned toward him, offering a faint smile. "I needed some air. The palace, it's a lot sometimes." Ethan nodded, understanding in his eyes. He stepped closer, the warmth of his presence enveloping her. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry if it feels overwhelming. But you're not alone in this. I'm here, Olivia." His words were simple, but they carried so much weight. It was the same promise he had made before, but this time, there was something different in the way he said it. There was an honesty, a depth to his words that she couldn't ignore. "You don't have to protect me all the time," she said, her voice quieter now, tinged with a mixture of gratitude and hesitation. "I can handle things on my own." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his gaze intense yet tender. "I'm not protecting you because I think you're weak," he replied, his voice soft but firm. I'm protecting you because I care about you. Because you matter to me. His words took her by surprise, and Olivia found herself momentarily speechless. She hadn't expected him to say that, not after everything that had happened. Her heart fluttered in her chest, but she quickly reminded herself to stay grounded. Ethan, I don't want to be a burden to you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. You've already done so much for me. Ethan shook his head gently, taking a step closer. You're not a burden, Olivia. You never will be. There was a quiet intensity in his eyes, a promise that made Olivia's breath catch in her throat. He reached out, taking her hand in his touch warm and reassuring. I'm not asking for anything in return, he said softly. I just want you to know that you can rely on me, and that no matter what happens, I'll always be here for you. The words hung in the air between them, and for a moment, Olivia felt a sense of peace she hadn't known she needed. She wasn't sure what the future held, and she wasn't sure how everything would unfold, but in that moment, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, things could be okay. She squeezed his hand gently, looking up at him with a soft smile. Thank you, Ethan, she whispered. He smiled back, his eyes warm with affection. You don't need to thank me, Olivia. You never have to. They stood there for a while, hand in hand, the weight of the world momentarily lifted by the simple connection they shared. It was a quiet, unspoken understanding between them. Olivia knew that the path ahead was still uncertain, but in that moment, she felt like maybe she wasn't as alone as she had once thought. As the days turned into weeks, the tension in the palace seemed to grow thicker, and Olivia felt it more than anyone. The court continued to murmur, unsure of what Ethan's protection of her truly meant. They had all seen the way he had stood up for her in the trial, but they also saw the consequences that might come with it. The kingdom's political landscape was never easy, and the support of an Alpha King for an Omega was something that would either change everything or lead to catastrophe. Yet, amid all the uncertainty, there was something undeniably comforting in Ethan's presence. Olivia couldn't remember the last time she had felt this secure, and it was in these quiet moments with him that she began to understand something about herself. Despite her previous doubts, the connection between them had grown stronger. Ethan's presence was no longer just about protection. It was about something deeper, something they both seemed to be struggling to put into words. Olivia found herself relying on him more than she ever thought possible. There were nights when she could feel the weight of the world crushing down on her shoulders, and it was in those moments that she would seek him out. Whether it was a shared meal or a walk through the gardens, his company offered her a brief respite from the tension that was building all around them. One such evening, as the sun began to set and painted the sky in hues of pink and orange, Olivia found herself in the garden once again, seeking a moment of peace. Ethan joined her shortly after, his footsteps soft on the gravel path. I didn't mean to interrupt your thoughts, he said gently, his voice low, but I thought I'd find you here. She looked up at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. It's been a long day. I just needed to get away from it all for a bit. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. I understand. I've been thinking a lot too. Olivia turned her gaze to the distant horizon, her heart heavy with the weight of the future. I don't know how long I can keep pretending that everything will be all right, she admitted softly. Every time I think I've found some stability, I feel the ground shift beneath me. Ethan stood silently for a moment, and then he spoke, his voice steady and reassuring. You don't have to face this alone, Olivia. Not now, not ever. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. I know the world may not see you the way I do, but that doesn't change how I feel. She felt a warmth spread through her at his words, though a small part of her still clung to the fear that the world would never accept them. I want to believe that, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But there's so much at stake. So much I can't control. What if everything changes, and I end up being the one who drags you down? Ethan reached out, gently taking her hand in his. You won't drag me down, Olivia, he said firmly. I chose this. I chose you. And there's nothing in this world or the next that could change that. His words were simple, but they carried an undeniable weight, a promise that Olivia wasn't sure she could ever fully comprehend. But in that moment, as she looked into his eyes, she knew that whatever the future held, she wasn't alone. They would face it together, no matter what. The thought gave her a sense of calm she hadn't known she needed, And for the first time in a long time, Olivia allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could work out. Ethan, too, felt the unspoken bond between them growing stronger with each passing day. His devotion to Olivia had become something he couldn't deny, though the future remained uncertain. There were still battles to fight, decisions to be made, and enemies to face. But for now, in the quiet of the garden, surrounded by the fading light of the evening, they were together. And that was enough. As time passed, Olivia's life in the palace began to take on a new rhythm. Though she had initially felt like an outsider, a quiet presence in a world that was not her own, she was slowly carving out a space for herself. She had found a sense of peace in the small things, the quiet mornings with Ethan, the shared glances when words seemed unnecessary, and the growing sense that she was no longer just a pawn in a game she didn't understand. But even as she settled into this strange new life, the shadows of the past lingered. Despite Ethan's constant reassurance, Olivia couldn't shake the feeling that the world was still watching, waiting for her to slip up. She had always known that as an Omega, her place in the world was precarious. It didn't matter how much Ethan protected her or how many promises he made. She was still at the mercy of forces far beyond her control. The tension in the palace had not faded. If anything, it had only intensified. The nobles, the officials, the power players of the kingdom, they were all still looking for a way to undermine Ethan's decisions, to reclaim control over the things they feared losing. Olivia knew she was a symbol in this battle, but she was no longer sure whether she was a symbol of hope or one of rebellion. One evening, as she walked through the palace halls, lost in thought, Ethan found her once again. His presence was like a steady anchor in the storm of her thoughts, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of relief when he was near. "Olivia," he called softly, his voice cutting through her musings. She turned to face him, and a small smile crept across her face. "I thought I might find you here," he said, stepping closer. His eyes were warm, but there was something else in them, something that told Olivia he had been thinking about her as much as she had been thinking about him. "I needed to get away from everything for a while," she confessed, glancing back at the high windows where the last rays of sunlight were fading. Ethan nodded in understanding. "It's been a lot lately, hasn't it?" he asked, his tone gentle. She nodded, the weight of the past few days settling into her chest. "More than I expected," she admitted quietly. "I feel like I'm constantly walking on a tightrope, trying to keep my balance, but knowing that one wrong step could send everything crashing down." Ethan moved closer, his presence a silent comfort. "You don't have to carry that burden alone," he said softly. "I'm here, and I always will be. Whatever happens, whatever comes next, we'll face it together. You're not alone in this, Olivia." His words were like a balm to the aching uncertainty that had settled deep inside her. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust in his words, but a small part of her couldn't shake the doubt. The world was vast, and it was filled with dangers that neither of them could predict. "I want to believe you," she said softly, her voice trembling just slightly. "But I'm scared, Ethan. I'm scared that everything we've built could fall apart in an instant. I'm scared that I'll lose you." Ethan reached for her hand, his touch warm and steady. "You won't lose me," he said firmly, his eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her heart flutter. "I'm not going anywhere. You're the one I've chosen, Olivia. No matter what the future holds, I'm staying by your side." His words, so simple yet so powerful, filled her with a sense of peace she hadn't known she needed. In that moment, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could overcome whatever obstacles lay ahead. Maybe together, they could create something stronger than the world that was trying to tear them apart. And as Ethan held her hand, a quiet promise passed between them. A promise that no matter the storm that raged outside, they would face it together, with strength, courage, and an unbreakable bond that neither time nor circumstance could destroy.